A low, trembling hum bled through the darkness, too distant to identify, too steady to ignore. At 35,000 feet, the night sky above the Barents Sea looked calm, but something unseen was moving through it with unnatural precision. The bomber's crew could not yet hear it, could not see it, but they felt it. Tiny shivers of static crept across their headsets, followed by a faint pulse on the EW scopes, there, then gone, like a shadow sliding behind a curtain. No Soviet radar should have reached them this far north. No interceptor should have been able to find them at this range. And yet, something had. In the cabin, the quiet was heavy. Every man on board sensed the same unspoken truth: the Arctic was hiding something. A presence. A hunter. And it was closing the distance faster than any threat they had ever trained for. The aircraft's instruments flickered again. One crewman leaned forward. What was that? No one answered. Outside, the stars looked unchanged, but the cold air whispered of a coming confrontation, one born from technology the West still did not fully understand. What locked onto them tonight would challenge everything the US Air Force believed about Soviet reach, speed, and lethality. October 14, 1986, Northern Norway, forward operating location. Major Daniel Kessler had flown close to the Soviet frontier for 7 years, but even with that experience, the briefing he received that morning unsettled him. At 41 years old, he was a quiet, meticulous officer, one of Strategic Air Command's most respected mission leads. He carried the calm, deliberate patience that long-range bomber crews valued. He had seen his share of close intercepts before, MiG-23s slicing past their wings, Su-15s shadowing them at a distance, Tu-128s climbing desperately to reach their altitude. None of those encounters shook him. But the intelligence slide projected in front of him did. A new Soviet interceptor. Designation: MiG-31 Foxhound. Capable of extreme high-altitude speed. Equipped with a radar array unlike anything previously fielded. Analysts claimed it could track targets at unprecedented ranges, but the exact numbers were still classified, part speculation, part fear. Kessler was assigned to lead a B-52H mission along a northern monitoring corridor. It was a routine intelligence collection flight, one of dozens flown each year. Its purpose: test Soviet radar activity, log signals, and return home. Nothing unusual. Nothing provocative. But the Soviet Union had been unusually active near the Kola Peninsula that week, and rumors spread that new air defense assets had quietly gone operational. His aircraft for the mission was B-52H Silvergate 5, a veteran bomber built at the height of the Cold War. It carried electronic monitoring pods, chaff bundles, and enough fuel to remain aloft for half a day. 8 turbofan engines gave it a roar that shook the runway. Its wings, long, flexible, and weathered, were scars of generations of missions flown at the edge of enemy territory. The B-52 was not built to fight interceptors head-on. Its strength was endurance, not maneuverability. Against older Soviet fighters, it could rely on jamming. Against the Foxhound, no one knew. By noon, Silvergate 5 lifted off from its temporary Norwegian airfield, the crew settling into the practiced rhythm of long-range operations. Once airborne, the bomber flew north toward the Arctic Circle, where sunlight faded into the muted grey of high latitudes. Their electronic warfare officer monitored the spectrum, searching for early signs of Soviet radar sweeps. At first, everything was routine. Hours passed with nothing unusual, just cold white clouds rolling beneath them and the drone of the engines. The bomber approached its northern turn, 350 miles from Soviet airspace. Historically, Soviet intercepts rarely reached that far without ground radar directing them. And even then, they usually appeared within a predictable window, never beyond the known limits of their detection range. But tonight, the Foxhound broke every pattern. At 1942, the first anomaly struck. A faint spike of energy, far too distant, yet unmistakably artificial, brushed across the B-52's receiver array. Kessler glanced over his shoulder as the EW officer leaned closer to his scopes. "That looked like a search sweep," the officer muttered. "But it's not from the direction it should be." 3 minutes later, another spike. Stronger. Sharper. Still impossibly far. Kessler felt the unease spreading through the cockpit. Soviet radar physics did not allow for this. Their earliest detection should have been hundreds of miles closer. Then, at 1951, the signal changed. A solid, unwavering lock tone filled the cabin, a sound every bomber crew dreaded. No search sweep. No tracking pulse. A full weapons-grade fire control lock. Foxhound, the EW officer whispered, reading the signature. It has to be a MiG-31. Nothing else can do that at this range. Kessler looked out into the dark horizon. There was nothing to see, no contrails, no silhouette, no lights. Just cold emptiness. But somewhere out there, farther than any Soviet fighter had ever reached, a MiG-31 had found them. It held them in its radar beam with enough precision to guide a missile. The crew fell silent. Every man understood the implication. The Soviets had solved a technological mystery the US had assumed was years away. And the Foxhound was not merely tracking them. It was hunting them. The lock tone grew louder. The B-52 could not outrun the interceptor. And their jamming suites were not designed for a radar of this magnitude. Somewhere beyond the clouds, the MiG-31 closed in, unchallenged. The radar lock did not break. The horizon remained empty. And the crew knew the Foxhound was not approaching at random. It was executing a calculated interception, one that would force Silvergate 5 into a confrontation no US bomber had ever faced. Inside the cockpit, Kessler steadied himself. The tone from the EW panel was unwavering, a thin, continuous blade of sound cutting through the bomber's interior. It meant only one thing: the MiG-31 had transitioned from long-range surveillance to full fire control engagement. The Foxhound's radar, an enormous, electronically scanning array, was focused on the B-52 with unblinking precision. Even at this distance, its power dwarfed every assumption US analysts had made. "Range estimate?" Kessler asked. The EW officer shook his head. "Too far. Our system can't calculate past this threshold. I've never seen a lock tone from this distance. Not even close." Kessler glanced toward the navigator. "Alter course 2 degrees west. Slow maneuver, nothing sudden." The navigator acknowledged and dialed in the change. The B-52 began a gradual drift across the Arctic sky, almost imperceptible from the outside. If the MiG-31 was tracking them manually, the shift might complicate the geometry. But if it was using automated guidance, the interceptor would adjust without effort. The lock persisted. Minutes stretched. The crew waited, listening, watching, thinking. Every man rehearsed procedures in his mind: chaff deployment, jamming sequences, evasive turns. But all of them knew the truth. Against a Foxhound closing at Mach 2.3, none of these measures offered certainty. The bomber was simply too large, too slow. Outside the cockpit window, the northern twilight had deepened. The horizon glowed faintly in the distance, a thin line of fading silver. The B-52 cut through the stillness like a vast metal shadow, its wings trembling gently in the cold wind. At 1958, the lock tone changed again. It sharpened, narrowed, intensified. The EW officer sat upright. His switched modes. That's missile guidance resolution. He's close enough now. Kessler felt the chill settle into his chest. How close? Within R-33 envelope. The R-33, NATO codename AA-9 Amos, was a missile designed specifically for the MiG-31. A massive, long-range interceptor weapon capable of hitting bombers at distances the West had considered theoretical. Its inertial mid-course guidance, combined with the Foxhound's radar link, made it one of the most dangerous air-to-air missiles on Earth. Silvergate 5 was now inside its lethal reach. At 20:02, the first visual sign appeared. A faint glint, barely distinguishable from the stars, caught the eye of the co-pilot. He leaned forward, squinting. Contact, bearing 195. He paused. Wait. Correction. Contact 200. High. Fast. The glint grew brighter. A distant shape began to materialize through the haze, sleek, pointed, unmistakably Soviet. It descended from above like a black spear cutting through the Arctic sky. The MiG-31. Even from afar, its lines were clear: enormous twin intakes, razor-like wings, a long fuselage built not for dogfighting but for raw speed and interception dominance. It closed distance with impossible speed, its afterburners glowing pale and ghostly in the thin air. The Foxhound held its formation at a distance no Soviet fighter had ever achieved during an intercept. It did not lateral across their wings. It did not make a display pass. It simply maintained a weapons-ready position, its radar beam locked directly onto the bomber's heart. The radio crackled. A voice, low, calm, almost emotionless, broke through the static. Russian. Controlled. Measured. Kessler didn't need a translation. The tone conveyed everything. The MiG pilot was issuing a warning, one that required no shared language to understand. I have you. Do not proceed. The co-pilot swallowed hard. They're not usually this aggressive. No, Kessler said. They're not. The MiG-31 edged a fraction closer. Not enough to trigger panic, but enough to demonstrate dominance. Enough to show that it could close the final distance before anyone in the B-52 could react. The Foxhound pilot was disciplined, perhaps even deliberately restrained, but he was showcasing capability in a way that seemed intentional. This was a demonstration, not a mistake. The EW officer broke the silence. Sir, I'm picking up telemetry. Not radar, data link. Something's feeding him. Kessler turned sharply. From where? Ground direction. Somewhere on the Kola Peninsula. They're providing him missile solutions. That revelation struck harder than the lock tone. The Soviets were not just testing the MiG-31. They were testing their integrated system, radar, data link, interceptor, against a live US bomber. At 20:07, the Foxhound pilot made his first aggressive maneuver. He dipped beneath the B-52's altitude, then climbed sharply, positioning himself at the bomber's vulnerable lower left quadrant where the aircraft's defensive systems were weakest. The movement was clean, calculated, and executed with a precision that left no doubt. He knew the B-52's blind spots. Kessler braced against the armrest, exhaling slowly. He wants us to react. He's herding us, the navigator said. The lock tone spiked again, louder this time, as though the Foxhound were tightening its hold. The R-33 missile slung beneath its fuselage glinted under the fading light, for pale silhouettes capable of ending Silvergate 5 in seconds. Another transmission crackled through the radio. The Foxhound pilot's voice remained calm, eerily composed, as though he were narrating a routine procedure rather than holding a bomber in kill range. The co-pilot's breathing quickened. Sir, he's pushing us toward restricted airspace. And Kessler understood immediately. This was not merely an interception. It was a forced redirection, an attempt to corner the bomber into an international incident, or worse, a fatal miscalculation. The MiG-31 shifted again, closer still. The lock was now deafening. Silvergate 5 had seconds to decide. The Foxhound angled upward, its silhouette cutting across the bomber's nose. Its missiles gleamed with quiet threat. Its radar beam tightened like a noose around Silvergate 5. And Kessler realized the MiG pilot was preparing for a step no Soviet fighter had ever taken against a US bomber, a step that could ignite a Cold War flashpoint in the frozen Arctic sky. The cabin felt smaller now, the air heavier. Every man aboard the B-52 sensed the shift. The Foxhound was no longer content with tracking or herding. Its posture changed subtly yet unmistakably, wings leveling, throttle rising, nose aligning with deliberate precision. The interceptor was positioning for a missile-firing solution that required neither bluff nor warning. Kessler wiped his palms on his gloves. All stations, prepare for evasive maneuver sequence Delta. The crew exchanged glances. Sequence Delta wasn't designed for survival. It was designed to complicate targeting, to buy seconds, not safety. Against a MiG-31 closing at supersonic speed, seconds were all they had. The EW officer leaned over his panel. Sir, his fire control mode just hardened. His refining lock resolution. Kessler breathed out slowly. He's getting ready. The first maneuver began, a slow dive of only a few degrees, enough to alter altitude without appearing panicked. The B-52's massive wings flexed under the shift. The MiG-31 responded immediately, matching the change with surgical precision. Kessler felt it in his bones. The Soviet pilot was testing him. Testing the bomber. Testing Washington's tolerance for provocation. The radio hissed again. A single, measured phrase, Russian, delivered in the same calm tone as before. But this time, even the crew who didn't speak the language understood the intent. He's ordering us to alter course further east, the navigator said quietly. East meant one thing. toward Soviet flight paths, toward danger, toward a political catastrophe. Kessler shook his head. We're not giving them that headline. The MiG pilot must have sensed the refusal. He drifted closer, barely 30 meters off the bomber's forward quarter. At that distance, every detail became visible. The angular cockpit, the enormous radar housing, the long, spear-like missile beneath its belly. And then the Foxhound rocked its wings, once. A warning. A final one. Kessler stared at it, knowing he could not react in kind. The bomber simply could not make quick aerodynamic gestures. The EW officer stiffened. Sir, new signal. It's him. He switched encryption bands. What does that mean? He's linking to ground-based targeting again. They're giving him firing authority. The word struck the crew like a physical blow. The Soviets were escalating the engagement beyond simple intimidation. At 2012, the MiG-31 surged forward, placing itself directly across Silvergate 5's path. Kessler's pulse raced, not because of fear, but because of the implications. The Foxhound wasn't just showing capability, it was forcing a diplomatic crisis, a high-altitude confrontation that could be interpreted as hostile engagement by either side. Sir, the co-pilot whispered, if he fires, we'll never see the missile. Not until it hits. Kessler nodded. We're not giving him that shot. He made his decision. Deploy chaff, low dispersion. Begin jamming cycle alpha. Drop our altitude 10 degrees. Execute now. The EW officer flipped the switch. A burst of metallic fibers erupted behind the bomber, scattering into the cold air like shattered silver dust. The B-52's jammers powered up, emitting a wide-spectrum wave designed not to blind Soviet radar, but to distort it, just enough to break a lock. The cockpit filled with static. For 3 agonizing seconds, the radar lock tone trembled, wavered. And then, it broke. The MiG-31 reacted instantly. Its nose dipped, its engines flared, and it tore downward to reacquire the bomber from below. The Soviet pilot was skilled, Kessler knew that, but even skill could not fully counter physics. The sudden altitude drop narrowed the engagement geometry. The Foxhound overshot slightly, forced to adjust. Climb 2 degrees, Kessler ordered. The bomber climbed, just enough to escape the interceptor's immediate relock. It was a delicate dance. Too much movement would appear aggressive, too little would leave them exposed. The Foxhound corrected its angle sharply, rising again, its presence like a blade slicing upward through the night. The EW officer's eyes widened. His reacquiring, but slower. Kessler exhaled. The jamming had worked, not completely, but enough. At 2016, the MiG pilot made his boldest move yet. He rose directly above the bomber, rolling inverted for a moment as though studying them from upside down, an act as precise as it was menacing. Then he pulled ahead, positioning himself along the bomber's projected path. The crew tensed. He's giving up, the co-pilot murmured. No, Kessler replied. He's showing us he could have fired. The Foxhound held its forward position for 20 seconds, its silhouette framed against the dim Arctic glow, dominant, unchallenged. And then, without warning, it broke away. The MiG-31 banked sharply to the east, its afterburners igniting in a long, pale plume. It climbed rapidly until it vanished into the thin upper air, leaving only a faint echo in Silvergate 5's instruments. The radar lock never returned. But the implications remained. The crew sat in silence for a long moment. The cockpit felt cavernous once more, the hum of the engines replacing the earlier tension. No words were needed. Every man knew they had just witnessed proof of a capability the US had not believed possible. At 2042, Kessler finally spoke. Set course for home. Log everything. Washington is going to want every second of this. Silvergate 5 turned toward the southwest, leaving behind the empty Arctic sky where, moments earlier, a Foxhound had held their lives in its crosshairs. As the bomber descended towards safer airspace, one truth lingered. The MiG-31 had changed the balance. Not through combat. Not through aggression. But through demonstration. A silent message delivered across frozen skies. We can reach you farther than you think. We can lock onto you longer than you expect. And if one day we choose to fire, there will be no warning. The Cold War continued. But after that night, the United States understood something it could no longer ignore. The Foxhound had redrawn the boundaries of the air war, and every bomber mission from that day forward would fly under its shadow.